So here we are. We're at the Balance of Flexion Extension Part 2. This is the second call for this month, and we'll meet again the first week of December, and have 2 calls next month, and then January will be the first guest call. I'm really excited about that. My friend Allison Linneman will be the guest speaker in January, and she is a Feldenkrais teacher as well as a yoga teacher, so she has some great things she'll be able to share with you. Okay, so Balance of Flexion Extension Part 2 is going to focus again on what I spoke about a bit last week, the balance of internal and external rotation, because I feel that you can't have one without the other, right? It's hard to get that balance of flexion extension if you do not have the balance of internal and external rotation in the hip sockets that I was talking about last week. So I'm going to go over all of that again. And one of the things I've learned as a yoga teacher, you know, I used to think that I could say something once and people would get it. And then I learned quickly that that's just not the case. So I've learned this repetition. It can't really hurt to repeat too much. That being said, I am very open to feedback. And if you find that I am repeating myself too much, let me know and I will change it up. But it is amazing to me. You know, I've been teaching yoga about 15 years, and I have people who've been coming to my class for 15 years, and some of them more than once a week. And they don't seem to tire of me telling the same stories and using the same instructions. And I change it up a little bit. I get interested in different poses, but they all cycle through. And, you know, there are only so many asanas and exercises out there. So, but you can let me know if you feel that I am repeating myself too much. So let's go right to it. We're going to take a look at these 2 guys again, and it's pretty basic stuff for me. The man on the left is in good position. The man on the right is in the position that I see almost everybody that I work with standing in. And you know, it's interesting because if you write a blog like I do, and if you're out on Facebook like I am, you're inviting people to give you their opinion. And I think I mentioned last week about an email I got from a guy who's saying he just never sees anybody like this. So what I want you to be, well, first you can tell me if you agree with me, and I also really want you guys to be looking out there and to see what you're seeing in the world in terms of people standing and walking. One of my favorite places to do that is online at a store, right? If I'm online at a store, I am a quintessential New Yorker. I do not have patience, and I go into stores. It drives my wife crazy because I'll literally go to the bank, and we don't really go to the bank anymore, do we? But I would go to the bank and leave if the line was too long. And I do that with a lot of things because I don't like waiting. But if I am on a line that I cannot help, I am looking at posture invariably. You know, I like everybody else live on my phone, but I try not to do it too much. So I'm always spying on people and looking at posture. And I just think so many people tuck under, so many people sink their thighs forward, so many people lean backwards, and just, you know, look online at a store, sit in a park and watch people standing or walking. Somewhat recently, I was down at the Battery Park in New York. I was doing a workshop, an outdoor workshop for a group of runners. And what was really fun was I had my own little staging area, and behind me was people waiting online for tickets to Statue of Liberty. And I was able to turn all these runners around and have them just stare at people online. And excuse me, the thing of it is there are exceptions. There are people who they're standing well. There are people who aren't standing as badly. And then there are people who are so profoundly the guy on the right that it's just glaringly obvious. So we're going to focus on this guy on the right a little bit when we get to when we dive a little deeper into this lecture towards the end. And the main focus, and it's pretty clear for me, let's get my toys up. My toy's not working. I wonder if that only works if All right, so I'm not gonna have my toy, but I think you can see my mouse cursor, and the mouse cursor is here on the lumbar spine. And if you are someone who leans backwards, and I mean even a fraction, you are going to be kind of stuck in the lumbar. You're going to be compressed in the lumbar, and all of the muscles in that area are not going to be able to function well. And that's what I'm going to focus on, the inability for muscles in the deep low spine to work and do their job. So we'll go over there, the job of those muscles in a couple of minutes. So what I was talking about last week, I was saying how the front of the body are flexors. You're looking at the psoas major on the left. Here we have the psoas major. And to oh, didn't want to do that. I thought I solved my annotation problem. Here we have the psoas major on the left, the quadriceps in the middle, the rectus abdominis on the right, and just for good measure, the SCM and the platysma, a minor muscle you don't hear talked about much. These are all flexors, right? Flexors work as extensors when they need to extend, but these are the muscles of the front of the body, and I look at the front of the body as the flexors of the body. The psoas is the main hip flexor. The quadricep is an essential hip flexor. Anyone who has what we refer to in yoga as hip flexor problems, that is a quadricep problem. That is a rectus femoris tendon problem. And that's an issue of posture. I think people sink into this tendon, and as a result, it tends to be too tight and just messed with. And then when we go to mess with it habitually from standing, and then we switch and go to use it as for an exercise, and it just doesn't know how to work with us. So on the right, we have the rectus abdominis, which is our main sit-up muscle. Function of the rectus is to draw the pelvis towards the rib cage and the rib cage towards the pelvis. If you're standing, it's they're going to both do the same thing at the same time. They're going to move up and down. If you're sitting, you can isolate that, right? If you're laying down, you can move the trunk up towards the sitting position, which is your crunch or sit up. And of late, I have been super into reverse crunches, reverse sit-ups, laying on your back and pulling yourself up. So that's to get the lower rectus. So I'm not going to go into this too much, but if you're looking at the rectus, which is on this, it's an 8-pack. It's not really a 6-pack. There's actually a little tendon usually at the bottom, so it's more like a 10-pack. But I think we tend to have a lot of tone in the top 4 to 6 of the pack, and not enough tone towards the bottom. And so that's been one of the things when I was talking about last week about what have you done to get strong. I talked about my hamstrings. A bunch of you guys took me up on that hamstring book, and I'll put that out there again. If you'd like a copy of the hamstring book, just reach out. You can put it into the chat. Jacob is here working with me. I'll introduce him to you later, and he can send it to you. Or you could email us later. I'm happy to send that to you as a gift. So that's a hamstring and gluteus maximus book, and that's one of the things I worked on most last year. But I also worked on my rectus. Again, I'm just loose. I'm long, and I lean backwards for most of my life, but I didn't tighten up in leaning backwards, right? My muscles do not tighten. They're just happy to lean backwards. They're happy to lean forwards. So my rectus was exceedingly long and did not have a ton of tone. And I spent a lot of time last year working on bringing tone to it. And one of the things I discovered was how few people have tone in the lower rectus, right? That the tendency is that the upper rectus is just naturally toned and the lower rectus is not, and that we need to work to bring tone into the lower rectus. Just that, I'm all about balance. So here we're not looking at balance of flexion and extension. You're looking at the balance of top and bottom of a muscle, and that's fascinating to me. There aren't a lot of muscles that are going to have that, even the possibility of, being weaker at the top or weaker at the bottom. So another interesting thing about the rectus, I just want to point out, I'm not going to go into this, I'm going to cover everything over and over again over time. I'm fascinated by the rectus abdominis. I'm fascinated by anomalies that happen in the body, and the rectus is one of them. The base of the rectus connects the base of the rib cage to the pubic bone, and the truth of the matter is there's no real way for a muscle to stretch that far, right, from the base of the rib cage to the pubic bone and be effective as a muscle. So what happens is the genius of the body inserted these tendons, right? The white lines you're looking at are tendons, tendinous slips in between these muscles, and those tendinous slips act as like extensor arms. They add more power. We have a number of ways of doing that. There's another piece of the anatomy called sesamoid bones, which are floating bones, and these floating bones also add power to the length of muscles. But in terms of the rectus, these tendons add power, and I am definitely going to stop my rectus lecture. But when we come back to this later, I'll talk about hard muscle and why I think hard muscle is bad, and the nature of making your rectus hard and what it means when the rectus pops and you see that six-pack, which some people think is aesthetically beautiful. I'm not the biggest fan, but I get it. So anyway, here are our flexors at the front of the body, and then we're looking at the back of the body are our extensors. Gluteus maximus, our big butt muscle, the hamstrings, gluteus maximus and hamstrings reach down. And when I'm teaching exercise, I am always trying to help people figure out how to get the gluteus maximus and the hamstrings to work correctly. I think most people use them incorrectly. Most people grip them and actually shut down a lot of our core by overusing the butt and rectus. Today's exercise will not go into that, but we will definitely get to work on bridge at some point. And I have a really specific way of teaching bridge and showing you how to get action, the action that we kind of really want to have happen in the rectus and transverse, in the rectus and hamstrings. And then here, what we're looking at are the erector spinaea muscles, and it's not highlighted here, but we have our multifidus, which is a lower muscle, and that's the muscle we're going to look at in our exercise, and that we'll look at that with our exercise and as well in our lecture. So let's move on. All right, so we're back to these two standing guys, and just to repeat what I said last week, which is a really curious thing to me, is if the body is about the balance of flexion extension, and the front of the body are predominantly our flexors, and the back of the body are predominantly our extensors, when we stand in this kind of posture, we are inverting that pattern, right? That we are extending our flexors across the front of the body, and we are shortening our extensors. And that's habitual, and that is chronic. And that leg sinking forward has such a profound effect on people. Now, if you're super loose, like I said earlier, I'm just loose. So my hamstrings never tighten because of bad posture. And I don't even think the guy on the right is an accurate description of what I used to stand like. I was worse. I was just, when you're loose, you can just kind of sink in. But even with that, I never had a tight muscle in my body. So some people are tight and sink forward, and their tightness is going to increase. If you're loose and you sink forward, it doesn't mean you're going to tighten. You might not be as loose in a certain way or have as much tension as you might, but the body lets kind of anything happen. So before we go forward, there is an interesting thing, is if you are tight. Let me back up and just mention one thing about loose and tight that I'll come back to a lot. Everyone is different. So let's group people into three categories: loose, tight, and medium. And let's say you're a teacher. You're a yoga teacher, and you have 21 people in your room. Pick a nice number, 21. So you have 7 people that are loose, 7 people that are tight, 7 people that are medium. And there is no teacher I've ever met that can teach to all 3 of those groups. But you kind of need to teach to all 3 of those groups, and it's very difficult. And the people who suffer most, the group that suffers most as a result of this, is the loose people. right? If you're super tight, what's going to happen? I'm not trying to minimize this, but if you're super tight, you're going to pull a muscle. That's kind of going to be the nature of the beast. If you're super loose, you can do way more damage. You can do joint damage very, very easily. If you're in the middle, you're good to go, and you just get to work. But people who are loose, you know, when I'm teaching yoga, I'm raising my voice to get people to do more. And there's not much more to be done. But if I'm raising my voice and you're loose and you're trying to stretch more and more, it is very easy for you to go into places that are just not good for your joints. So what that means is you need to learn who you are. And if you are of the loose variety, you really have to learn how you're going to work with your looseness and try to incorporate the understanding or the need of your looseness into your body and how you work with others. And that just makes teaching complicated. It also makes practicing complicated when you are loose. So we're going to go back to what does this have to do with pain relief? And let's take a look at the pelvis. So, you know, I want to always figure out ways to help people to be well aligned. That's endlessly what I'm looking at. And in the picture on the left, I think that is a well aligned pelvis, well aligned spine and legs. And that what that means to me is the lumbar spine. The center of the lumbar spine is, you know, your center of gravity, and the center of the in the body, and the center of the lumbar spine wants to be stacked directly over the femur bone. And when the lumbar spine is directly stacked over the femur bone, we get weight transfer that we're looking for. So essentially, what's the role of our skeleton is to bear and transfer weight. And you know, when you're looking at the spine, you have a lot of cushiony discs between all the bones. When you're looking at the knee, you have the meniscus, which is another cushiony cartilage disc. And we want to transfer weight through the bones. And if your lumbar spine is stacked on top of your femur, you are going to transfer weight successfully from the lumbar down into the femur. And the opposite is true as well. Excuse me. If you're looking at the picture on the right and your lumbar is off line with the femur, there is no way weight is transferring down through the spine on the right as well as it's transferring down through the left. And the name of the game is 70 years, 60 years, I'm 53 years, and I transferred weight through my skeleton really poorly for 40 of them. Long after I started doing yoga and exercising hardcore, I was walking and standing with terrible posture, and much of that was because of bony alignment, skeletal alignment. So it's so sorry. It's simple and basic of a sort. You want to stack your bones, and we're going to really look at this area again as we're moving on. Here's our pelvis. Our pelvis is 2 hip bones and a sacrum. And these 2 cups in the pelvis are called the acetabulum. And into the acetabulum sits the femur bone. The femur bone is a long shaft with a neck, and then the femoral head, which is a ball that fits into the socket of that acetabulum I mentioned last week. That is a very free joint. As you know, so since I am of the loose variety, I can take my foot and put it behind my head. Not a big deal for me. I've been doing it since I was a little kid, and it's just part of my makeup. And what that means is my femur head is extremely willing to roll and rotate in the acetabulum, and that's because of a looseness of muscle and a certain looseness of ligament. I don't think I'm lax. I'm going to talk about ligamentous laxity at some point, but I don't think I'm lax in my ligaments. I'm loose enough in my ligaments so I can, you know, rotate and put my feet behind my head. I don't do that kind of work much anymore, but I am certainly capable of it, and it's a really kind of wonderful feeling if you're able. So again, you have the leg, the femur sits into the acetabulum, and that to me determines so much of what happens in the body, so much of our ability to find the balance of flexion extension, and you know, to carry on with that, so much of our ability to find the balance of internal and external rotation. I think everyone is externally rotated. That's just the nature of my beast. I had a private, I went to somebody's house and I got there and they were busy working, and they had a standing desk. So they said, just let me, give me a minute while I finish this email. And I was able to just stand there and watch them at their standing desks. I'm a fan of standing desks. I think standing desks can be really great. But if you're not standing well, how good is a standing desk, right? So if you learn to use a standing desk, you use a standing desk 4 or 5 hours a day with bad posture, that's no better than being sedentary on a chair. So one of the things I actually told this woman was, I feel like there's a benefit to mixing it up. I use a chair, I use a ball, I stand, I use a balance board. So for me, that's just movement. But I was able to just stand there and look at her, and right away she finished her email, and I said, all right, well, we can just work on your posture at your standing desk, because you're tucking your pelvis under and you're externally rotating your femur heads at all times. And that was really the basis of where we went from there. And to be honest, it's the basis of where I start with almost everybody. The image I use in many of my yoga classes is screw your femur heads in. Put them correctly into their sockets. Not enough people are doing that. So here's just another image of the pelvis and the leg. And I love this image because it's not a deep cup that the femoral head is sitting into. It's a pretty shallow cup. It's about 1/3 in, 2/3 out. And it sits into the cup, and it has a lot of room to move, and it is protected or wrapped in or connected. So the way the body works on the most simplest level is ligaments connect bone to bone. That's the function of ligaments. They connect the bone to bone, and muscles are connected to bones through tendons, right? So we have muscles, ligaments, tendons, fascia. Of a sort, everything is fascia, everything is connective tissue, and we have the ligaments that connect bones to bones, and the ligament you're looking at here is the iliofemoral ligament. It's the strongest ligament in the entire body. And just to show you, if you're not well aligned here, I like this image a lot. This image on the left of a pelvis with the leg in the hip socket and on the leg under the pelvis, that has an iliofemoral ligament that's in a fairly decent shape. And the picture on the right, that bone is just pushing into that iliofemoral ligament the whole time, and it's no joke. If it's the strongest ligament in the body, it's the strongest ligament for a good reason. And aligning the bones correctly gives your ligaments a break. They're not meant to stretch. They are tough. They're fibrous. They want help to do their job, and the only way they get help is if your bony alignment is successful. So moving on, we're going to get to the muscle I want in a little bit. We have here, like I repeated last week, and I talk about these trio of muscles very, very often. These are the 3 muscles that connect the upper and lower body, and I can't speak about them too much, and I will go on and on about them over and over again. The 3 muscles connecting the upper and lower body are gluteus maximus here on the bottom right, connects the sacrum to the leg. Gluteus maximus connects into the leg. It also connects to the iliotibial tract. It has 2 insertions. Piriformis on the left. Piriformis connects to the sacrum on the inside of the sacrum. This is a good representation. It connects on the anterior portion of the sacrum. It also connects on the greater trochanter, the outer hip. So when I say it connects on the anterior portion, that makes it functionally very, very different than if it connected on the posterior portion. And what that means is it acts as a bit of a stabilizer of the pelvis. Not a huge one, but it does stabilize the pelvis a little bit. But it's connecting the leg to the spine through the sacrum. And then we have our big connection at the psoas muscle, psoas major. And the iliopsoas is a muscle group. So it's 3 muscles, psoas major, psoas minor, iliacus. But psoas major is the only one that's connecting the leg to the spine, the upper and lower body. Psoas minor connects pelvis to the spine. Iliacus connects leg to the pelvis. So leg to the spine is solely the psoas major. So piriformis, gluteus maximus connect at the back. Psoas major kind of straps you down at the front. I'm pretty sure I mentioned you don't have problems in one without the other. So we'll return to these guys a lot. I need to get a drawing of women in the same way. Someone pointed that out to me, and I agree. It's pretty amazing. You know, I sell my walking program, and that's my main gig. I teach people to walk. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And in my walking program, you can send me a video, and I analyze your video of your walk. And, you know, 80% of the people who do my work are women. So that's why it was pointed out to me that probably should have women here, but we're going to work on that. So when you're looking at these three muscles connecting the legs to the spine, you need, if the psoas attaches at the front and piriformis and gluteus maximus attach at the back, they need to be balanced. And in the man on the left, they are balanced, and in the man on the right, they are not balanced. You are going to, in the same way we are, you know, stretching the overly stretching the flexors and crunching the extensors, that here gluteus maximus and piriformis are going to be habitually shortened, and psoas major is going to be, it's weird, I don't want to say habitually lengthened. It's just not going to function very well. It's not going to have the tension required, and we're going to spend a month on the psoas, so we're going to always come back to that. But the psoas attaches to the back half of the inner thigh. This guy on the left, the back half of his inner thigh is in the back plane of the body, which creates a tension for the psoas to cross the rim of the pelvis and align on the lumbar. The guy on the right, the back half of his inner thigh is in the front plane of the body, so his psoas loses the ability to create the tension needed to activate the erector spinaea. It might get a little complicated, but that is some really key information. All right, so today's deep dive is going to go into the muscles of the deep low spine. So here we have rectus abdominis, quadratus lumborum on the left, quadratus lumborum on the right, multifidus on the left. So the rectus abdominis, like I said, is a flexor. It draws the pelvis towards the rib cage towards the pelvis, and it does that in different ways depending upon the position of the body. The QL, the quadratus lumborum, is, that's the sound of my dog's clicking nails. We have a 14-year-old dog he has liver cancer. Oh, I think he just saw his tail. He's a sweet boy. He has liver cancer, and we're processing the end of his life, which is never fun. So, sorry. QL is the muscle on the right, and quadratus lumborum, if you notice, let me see, I will go back. I'll show you. Your psoas muscle attaches up and down the lumbar spine, and so does the quadratus lumborum. Quadratus lumborum is not technically an extensor. It is a lateral, it's a side stretching muscle. So it shortens when you side stretch, and anyone who's taken my yoga class knows how much I focus on side stretching. There are some things I just do in every single class I teach, and side stretches are among that group of things that I think are so important. And I spend a lot of time stretching between the pelvis and the rib cage, and that's a QL stretch. And just to go back a little bit, if you are in a yoga class, I think everyone does yoga like the guy on the right. You know, I'm trying to teach people to do yoga like the guy on the left. If you're the guy on the right and this is your posture and you do a side stretch, you're not really getting a good intrinsic stretch of the quadratus lumborum. You know, you have to be in the position on the left to get your legs under your hips to really get into the side body correctly. So that's just a little aside. So the QL is a side stretching muscle, but when it acts together, it works as an extensor, right? So when both sides are in the game, it will act in extension. And on the left, we have multifidus, and multifidus is a back pain muscle. I have a video series out there. It's 3 muscles of back pain. And why not? Feel free to reach out for me, and I will, if you don't have it already, I'll hook you up with that. It's 3 10-minute videos. One One is on the transverse abdominis, one is on the multifidus, and one is on gluteus medius. And all three of those are, back pain muscles, pain muscles. So multifidus is an amazing muscle. It is a and with the exercise we're going to do in a little bit is multifidus. It is a stabilizer of the pelvis, and they're short little muscles, and it's a stabilizer of the pelvis along with the pelvic floor, which I'm really interested in, and transverse abdominis, and a different abdominal muscle. I can show you that here. So on the right, we have transverse abdominis, which is the deepest of the abdominal muscles, and that everything has caveats, right? So this is a nice image, but right around here where you see this hole in the linea alba, the transverse abdominis, which I just said is the deepest muscle, it actually switches with the rectus abdominis, which is the sit-ups muscle I showed you before. And the rectus abdominis moves behind the transverse to attach on the pubic bone. So at the very base, it's the deepest. But for the most part, the transverse is the deepest of the abdominal muscles. And multifidus, this muscle in the middle. Now, multifidus runs up and down the whole spine in its short little spans, goes from vertebra to vertebra. But it has, you can see it has a slightly greater mass at the base. So we have transverse abdominis on the right, multifidus in the middle, and the levator ani, which are the muscles of the pelvic floor. They are three muscles of the pelvic floor: iliococcygeus, pubococcygeus, and I'm spacing. Oh, it's written here. Iliococcygeus, pubococcygeus, and the coccygeus. So they're called the levator ani, and I like the names of your anatomy muscles. They are the elevator of the anus. So they are erectors, right? They are lifting up. So multifidus, which is an erector, transverse, which, in Pilates, it's called the corset. Transverse wraps from the back to the front. Transverse connects, the only of the abdominals that connects into the lumbar spine, and it wraps from the back to the front, and it meets, there's two of them, it meets in the middle of the linea alba. So these three muscles, multifidus, pelvic floor, transverse, they very much help to stabilize the spine and movement. Multifidus is a very big one when it comes to that. We're not going to do it. We're not going to get into the pelvic floor today too much, but I am a big proponent of tone in the pelvic floor, and I teach my version of Kegels to build that tone. And why I say it's my version, because Kegels get a really bad rap out there in the world, for good reason. If you're hypotonic, if you're too tight in your pelvic floor muscles, trying to do Kegel exercises to build tone there is not going to really serve you. But I have a way of teaching them that I think is very effective, and really, everything that I'm teaching exercise-wise it's teaching a physical, but it's teaching a experiential, right? There's very little interest in me in just doing something. I want you to do it and feel it. And so I feel like when I teach Kegels or pelvic lifts, or, any way you look at it, I'm giving you a very specific reason of how to feel them, why I think they're okay. And right before we started the call, I was just playing around in my room. Maybe I'll show you a little bit. Let's see if you can see. I got my Bosu ball in the back there. And I was playing around on the Bosu, showing Jacob how I love to squat. I do balance board work, and I do Bosu work, and on the Bosu I squat a lot, and squatting is just so incredibly important. Same thing, I teach a lot of squats in my yoga classes. So you don't need to do Kegels on a certain level, because you need to squat. Squatting builds the pelvic floor profoundly. Squatting builds the pelvic floor profoundly, and it builds gluteus maximus beautifully if you're doing them well. So leaving that aside, we have multifidus, transverse abdominis, and the levator ani, the muscles of the pelvic floor that are providing stability to the pelvis in movement, and actually even before movement. I tell this story often about, it's all about tone. It's all about resting tone. We'll go into that another time. I'm really a fan of the concept of resting tone, what it means to be standing still, and what kind of muscle tone do you have. So to go back to my two guys, to me, the guy on the left has resting tone in his flexors and extensors that keep them balanced without effort. You do not need, to me, you don't need to think about making a muscle when you're standing, right? And I deal this with a lot. I get a lot of emails from people misinterpreting what I'm saying and saying, well, I'm walking and I'm holding in my abs, and I'm walking and I'm holding my pelvic floor, and everything is good in some way, shape, or form, right? Like if you're weak and you need to create that tone to feel good, that's fine, but you don't want to really be walking around making muscle. You want to be living. And so the guy on the left, he is just balanced, and the guy on the right is not going to be balanced. And it's just pretty much as simple as that. His resting tone is resting tone that's short on the front and long on the back. So essentially, when I started teaching walking, really my walking program is a posture program, but posture is hard. Standing still is hard. Standing up is hard. So I decided to teach people to learn how to stand by movement, by walking. It's gone pretty well so far. So here's an image that I sort of stole from, I'm never going to remember his name. This guy I really kind of like, even though I don't remember his name. And he's the creator of something called the lower and upper cross syndromes. And it's just a nice theory. It's kind of interesting stuff. So what are we looking at? We're just going to focus on the ones at the bottom. And the labels are facilitated spinal arresters, facilitated rectus femoris at psoas, and inhibited abdominals and inhibited gluteals. So what that means is that when it says facilitated, it means tight. Let's use the word tight. So we have tight rectus femoris tendon, tight psoas, tight multifidus, and tight QL, quadratus lumborum, and tight erectus spinaea. And the minute these muscles get tight, their opposites, gluteals and abdominals, are going to get weak. So just to go back up here, not to return too many times, this dude on the left does not suffer from an inhibited anything because he has resting tone and resting balance. And this guy is, like everyone I work with, going to be tight in the lumbar spine, tight in those muscles, tight in the psoas, weak in the glutes, weak in the abdominals. And that's an endless pattern we're trying to change and get rid of. So moving on, I'm just about done, and we're going to look at our exercise. But I just wanted to throw in one of my key images. And again, we're going to spend a lot of time on the psoas over time, but I just wanted to throw in this, which I think is a pretty profound image. What you're looking at the left is a psoas that is fairly happy, and this is where it gets into the psoas, not a hip flexor image, which is interesting because you can see how the psoas comes down and it goes into the bowl of the pelvis and then goes forward and then comes back again to attach to the back half of the inner thigh. So psoas is always lengthening, but I don't want to go too deeply into that right now. So we have a happy psoas, and we have a happy, this is rectus abdominis, right? And we have happy erectors, happy spinal muscles. What happens when the psoas is tight? Function of the psoas has a few functions. It's a slight external rotator of the leg. But when the psoas engages, the psoas draws the lumbars forward. That's what happens when the psoas, when it functions. So this gets into some of my stuff about when we're on all fours. The thing about being human that's most amazing is we have a curve in our lumbar spine. It's the thing that makes us human. It's the thing that allows us to walk. And that curve in the lumbar spine was created by the psoas, right? So we came up to stand from all fours. We had a flat spine. If you look on your dogs and your cats, they don't have butts. They their gluteus maximus, their gluteal muscles are all really, really weak because they're not necessary. Our big butt muscle, they don't have a big butt muscle at all. Our gluteus maximus gets created when we come up to stand because it, along with the hamstrings, pulls down on the tailbone and the sit bone, not on the tailbone and the sit bones, to pull the pelvis to level to stand us upright. And when that happens, the psoas, which you see here crossing the front rim of the pelvis, I'm not going to go looking for other pictures, but on a four-legged animal, the psoas does not cross the rim of the pelvis, which is why it's so tasty. It is the tenderloin. Your filet mignon is the psoas muscle on a cow, and it's because it doesn't touch the pelvis. So ours wouldn't, not to offend any vegetarians, but ours would not taste so good because a good chunk of the muscle is rubbing across the bone. But we come up to stand, the psoas engages and it pulls the lumbar forward, creating the lumbar curve for the first time ever. And we're the only creatures with a curved lumbar. We're not the only bipedal creatures. We're the only creatures with a curved lumbar. So in other words, birds, there are plenty of bipedal birds, but they're always leaning forward with a flat spine. We need the lumbar curve to walk, to ambulate on two legs. You know, gorillas and apes can walk for a little bit on two legs, but they always fall back to the earth pretty quickly because they don't have that lumbar spine to support the verticality. But the picture I'm showing you here, which is really intense, is what happens when the psoas is tight. When the psoas is tight, it is pulled forward more. It creates an excessive curve in the lumbar spine, which creates more shortness in those erectors. So that's what we're looking at. Tight psoas, inhibited, tight psoas, tight erectors. Tight psoas, tight erectors. Often strong, but tight. But then this is just a powerful image to me because the flip side of that is here's our abdominal contents. That's just, there's nothing there. But when the psoas is tight, it shoves the abdominal contents forward into the rectus and it shoves the rectus out. And when I do my psoas workshops, one of the things I'm talking about is everything for me is diagnostic, right? I'm just teaching diagnostically. So I'm just always looking at things. And I know somebody comes in, I just had this last week. I saw a woman who was, probably about 5'6", very, very skinny, except she had a pot belly. And I didn't need to touch her belly to know that it was rigid. And what that means is her psoas was tight. And the tight psoas it limits the volume of the abdominal contents and it shoves your intestines forward into the belly, which makes the belly hard and overstretched. But for the point of today, it shortens those erectors like crazy. And that is a big problem for us. So what this comes down to is you can have the balance of flexion extension without the balance of internal and external rotation. And you can have a happy, if you are externally rotated, which is really the point of last week's chat, if you are externally rotated, you are by definition shortening your multifidus and erectors. It is possible. It gets into very, I speak in the general, right? You could be turned out and not have a tight piriformis. It doesn't happen all that much. You can. But for the most part, when you externally rotate your femur heads, you are shortening the piriformis, you are tightening gluteus maximus, and you are basically, shortening the multifidus or taking the multifidus out of the game, and so that they are not able to stabilize the pelvis the way they're meant to, and that is just an incredibly important thing. So now we're going to take a look at the exercise for today. But first, yesterday's email was about a resistance to change. And so I just want to talk about that a tiny bit before we do the multifidus exercise. I am selling change, right? I'm teaching people to walk, teaching people yoga, teaching people exercise, but what I'm selling is, are you willing to change? And I can promise you, most people are not willing to change. And for whatever reason, I am not wrapped up in the reason. I am not concerned with the reason. I can't make you do something that you're not going to do or not capable of doing. But I can say I see a lot of people, and people don't want to change. And I have myself, I don't like change. And I have children, and they don't like change. Like, we are obsessed with stasis, even though we're never stable, we're never still. Like, that's what I said in the email, as long as we're breathing, we are changing, and we change constantly. And there's that fear of change. And so essentially all I am selling in my work is, let me show you who you are. Let me show you an ideal of where I think you should be. And you have to process that and decide, am I interested in making the change? And I have to say, most people aren't. There are a lot of people who come to me and I know they need my work really badly, and they come once and they do not come back. Sometimes they come back in a year. I have a lot of stories, but I'll share one to finish up before we do the exercise. Way back, this is going way back, in 2008, I had a feature in the New York Times. I had a full page feature on me and my walking program, which was really the start of my business. It just, all of a sudden, the phone started ringing, and one of the people that came in was a woman. I talked to her on the phone. She came out to my studio, and on the phone she had said, I have bad posture, I'm weak, I have bad posture, and I have flat feet. So in comes a fairly statuesque woman. She's probably pretty close to 6 feet tall. She was definitely taller than me. And we're standing there talking, and she very clearly didn't have flat feet. And she didn't appear weak to me, right? And her posture wasn't all that bad. She had a neck pain. She came to me for neck pain. And I said, all right, well, I did my shtick. But basically I said, you're gripping your butt all the time. Relax your butt. She was able to relax her butt, and her neck pain went away. She was a very, very accomplished swimmer in childhood. She was a competitive swimmer in college. So I was able to look at her and go, hey, you're strong. I get it. You just kind of have faith in your ability to hold yourself up. Stop gripping your butt so much. I think your neck will relax. In fact, that's exactly what happened. She was thrilled, and she said, oh my God, I cannot wait to send my husband to you. I said, great. And this has happened to me many times before, where people send friends or loved ones, and I can tell you that in the game of change, it's not gonna happen, right? That you need a little more incentive to change than somebody paying for you to go to this guy, or just saying, oh honey, I made you an appointment, and go. So in walked her husband a few weeks later, and he was not his wife, right? He was a desk jockey. He had no strength. He had really bad posture. And so we're doing a rap, and I have him walking, and I'm looking at him, and then I said, all right, let's, come on, let's sit down and do some exercise. And he stopped, and he looked at me and goes, that's not why I'm here. And I said, okay, what do you mean? He goes, well, my wife told me why I came, why I was willing, and she said I don't have to exercise. She said I just had to walk. And I said, oh, that's great. So sorry to say your wife just needed to walk, but you don't have any muscle. You don't have any tone. And he fancied himself a high school athlete, which I find very often. You're the star quarterback and then never do another thing the rest of your life and think, well, I was the star quarterback, I must be strong. So he was really weak, and I said, well, I'm so sorry, but you need more than just walking. You need to do exercise. And he goes, all right, I'm out of here. I said, great, no problem. And that's one of the things, and I said it to him, and I say it to a lot of clients, if necessary, I am not at all attached to the success of my clients. I'm not attached to the success of my students. The idea of yoga is to be not attached. I'm there to share. I do not get wrapped up in, I'm insecure like everyone else. I want to succeed, but I work hard at not being wrapped up. If you don't hear what I'm offering, there's somebody else out there who might share better with you or might communicate better with you. So I told this guy, you need to exercise. He left. But what's interesting is about 6 months later, he called me back. And I worked with him for 5 years. I mean, I just stopped working with him less than a year ago. But every week, he did not want to change, but to his credit, he left. Who knows what his wife said to him or how it worked, but he called me back in 6 months. So it's never too late to change. But I can promise you that for me, the work of most people on earth is to learn how to accept change, embrace change, and the work of pain relief it has to involve change. You have to change the environment that you are in that created the pain in order to get out of it. And I know that is really difficult for some, more difficult for some than others, but it is just the nature of the beast. So I'm going to put that question from yesterday's email up on the Facebook group later, and hopefully we get a little discussion going about your relationship to change, what you've done to change in the last bit of time, and how you feel about all that. So here's today's exercise. This is actually a still from that muscle of back pain video series that I told you about. This is the model is Alicia Raquel, who I've worked with many times. She's a sweetheart, and she was kind enough to do these videos with me. So let's do this exercise, and I'm going to tell you about this exercise, and then we'll do it. And now I understand this is like last week I said there are ways to work around last week's exercise. There's no real way to work around this exercise. You kind of do need to be able to get on your hands and knees. I understand if some people can't, that's no worries. But I'm going to talk you all through it. And so you need to get onto your hands and knees. So this is an exercise I teach very often, but in truth, it's a test. This is a physical therapy test for the multifidus muscle. It is not traditionally used as an exercise, but I've taken it into the exercise realm. And bird dogs are a classic exercise I teach, where in this position, Alicia would have her left arm forward and the right leg back. That is an absolutely classic core exercise. So I often use this now as a warm-up to bird dogs. But as an experiential test, this is a really profound exercise. So if you're up and you are ready, you're going to come onto your hands and knees. I'm going to leave the share behind. And I'm going to stop the video for a minute so I can get a glass of water. Have a drink of water. All right, so hopefully you're set up. I'll bring my video back up, no worries. Hopefully you're set up and you're going to be on your hands and knees. So one thing you want to feel on your hands and knees, I want you to try to set up a flat back. Hopefully you had enough time to get down there. I want you to set up your spine in a flat back. So you're going to be on hands and knees with the knees under the hips, the thighs pretty close together, not too far apart, and the wrists shoulder distance apart. And I want you to set up a flat back, and a flat back to me is the smallest possible curve in your lumbar spine. And once you establish that small curve in the lumbar spine, you want to feel what's going on in the upper spine. I like a position that has the upper spine just slightly between the shoulder blades. Like it drops just a little bit down between the shoulder blades. And so I am going to stop the video, not to be too self-conscious. So set that flat back up, being on your hands and knees. And the exercise itself is incredibly simple and basic. Take the right hand up off the floor 1/2 inch, just 1/2 inch. Take the left knee up off the floor 1/2 inch, just 1/2 inch, and see what happens. Nothing really matters in isolation. You really want to see what happens on the second side and to compare. But what happened when that knee came off the floor in terms of the stability of the lower back? I'm keeping you there a few seconds. I usually try to keep you there about 10 seconds to see if it gets easier or harder, and release. Second side. So left hand up 1/2 inch, and now I really want you to pay attention to what happens in your low spine when that right knee comes up. So bring the right knee 1/2 inch off the floor. It doesn't go backwards. It doesn't go sideways. It just lifts up a tiny bit. Feel the difference in the two sides, because that's what matters most. So ideally, technically, however you want to look at it, when you are alternating and the right and left knee are up off the floor, nothing should happen. So what happens it manifests differently for different people. Sometimes we lose the curve. We tuck the pelvis under and flatten the lumbar spine, which creates a false sense of stability, and we don't shake very much. If you keep the lumbar curve and you don't have a ton of tone in the multifidus, you are going to basically rock and roll in search of stillness. And again, what's most important to me is what is the difference in the two sides. Let's just run through it again, and you'll see immediately it's going to be easier the second time we do it. So we'll go quickly. Right hand up a ½ inch if you're still on your hands and knees. Left knee up a ½ inch. See what happens in the movement. Release that. Left hand up a ½ inch. Right knee up a ½ inch. Where do you go? Do you stabilize? Do you tuck under? Do you drop into a deeper lumbar curve? Honestly, I don't care as much as I want you to really know and feel and see if you can get a sense of what your body tends to do. And over time, you can do this as an exercise. Like I said, even though it's a piriformis test, you could do this as an exercise. Over time, when this muscle gets strong, the body gets strong. So like I said, multifidus, along with levator ani and transverse abdominis, they stabilize the pelvis and the lumbar spine before you move. Oh, I meant to say, I'm easily distracted. If you've ever heard of somebody who, they throw out their back when they sneeze, that is someone who is lacking tone, right? Because what happens is, when I said that these three muscle groups stabilize the pelvis and lumbar before you move, you're going to sneeze. Your brain knows you're about to sneeze, and it sends information to stabilize. Get ready, because there's a powerful action. Sneezing is like vomiting and coughing. These are powerful, very difficult actions on the spine. So if you don't have enough tone and you sneeze or cough really hard, you throw out your back because the multifidus doesn't stabilize before the action happens. And I am like endlessly fascinated by that. And I am not a Pilates teacher, and I have not studied Pilates, but in my endless simplifying of things, I look at Pilates as basically, multifidus, levator ani, transverse abdominis. Like, to me, those are their three, the holy grail of muscles that we need to have tone in for back pain. So there is today's balance of flexion extension, and today's exercise on multifidus, which I really love. And like I said, I can send you those videos if you'd like. And I am going to put the video back. I got my water, and I am open to take some questions.